what is your position in regards to the council, and what role will it play in your administration as sheriff?
Okay, the Sheriff's Council, in its original intent, and the way that Sheriff Thomas set it up, was an outstanding organization. There was a checks and a balances. The way I look at the Sheriff's Council, if they would not have purchased the vests for the deputies, the vests for the correctional officers, the equipment for the helicopters, the robot, things of that nature for our explosive ordnance team, those monies would have had to come out of the general fund. And out of the general fund, then that meant, ladies and gentlemen, that your streets would be in worse shape than they are now. Public health would be in worse shape than it is now. Mental health would be in worse shape than it is now. It freed up those monies to go to other departments within the county. So it was very, very important. The problem that happened, again, the bylaws were rewritten, and basically your checks and balances got kind of skewed there, and that's when it really developed the problem. I really do firmly believe that a sheriff's council is needed. Unlike the former sheriff, I would still restrict it when elected. It's going to come back, but it's going to be solely for the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department. That's our baby, that's our idea, because a lot of the equipment that we get, all the other departments in the county benefit from it. And that's why I'd like to keep it solely within house. Thank you.
Sheriff Anderson.
The Sheriff's Council is a great organization. Most of the folks on the Sheriff's Council are very good people who were serving the county in a very good way. They've done a lot of good for the Sheriff's Department over the years by raising funds for specialized equipment. And that's their charter, to raise funds for specialized equipment, not to be political. The bylaws were changed as time went on, and the authority of the sheriff was diminished as a result of the change of the bylaws. The Sheriff's Department would be supportive of the Sheriff's Council coming back, doing their mission with the change in bylaws and under certain circumstances, and I would support that. There are numerous pieces of equipment that have been purchased over the years that we wouldn't have because of the budget deficits that we experience from time to time. Therefore, I'm open to the idea of bringing back the organization, but under different rules. And I would have to agree to those rules before we did that. But as I said before, they're a great group of people. The majority of them were there for the right reasons, and they did an excellent job for Santa Barbara County.
Chief Brown.
Thank you. The Sheriff's Council, certainly the concept and the idea was a great one. It's a very tragic situation, what has happened, the controversy that developed. But very sadly, I think it points to the lack of leadership of our incumbent sheriff, because when the Sheriff's Council was in turmoil and when it needed his leadership the most, he walked away from it. And he severed the lifeline to his organization, to an organization which was funneling in millions of dollars, over $1 million a year into the organization. When they needed his leadership, instead of trying to fix the problem, instead of trying to mitigate it, he walked away from it. In terms of what would happen now under my administration, I believe that the Sheriff's Council concept is so tainted right now that it probably would have to be reorganized as the Santa Barbara County Public Safety Foundation. I would like to see that foundation benefit all public safety agencies if the fire service was willing to go along and merge with the Fire Alliance. And if they were not, if that wasn't the case, then it should benefit all law enforcement organizations. But it should be modeled after an organization like the New York City Police Foundation, where it is a stand-alone entity, an official charity, but a stand-alone entity of philanthropists that is not having strings pulled by the sheriff or by anyone else from outside the organization. And instead of the sheriff's idea of having more control over that organization, I believe it should have less control. It should be a completely independent group of philanthropists that exists for the right reason, because they want to raise money and help public safety officers in this county, not because they want some kind of benefit from the Sheriff's Department. And I think there is a tremendous potential for a conflict if it's set up in any other way.
Former Sheriff Thomas.
It was a standalone agency. When I founded the Sheriff's Council in 1993, it was a way to help raise funds at a time that the California budget had really tanked. It was a bad time. We couldn't afford the equipment that we needed just to do our regular work, much less specialized work. We formed it with the idea that we would have half of the people from the North County, half of the people from the South County, half of the people who had money and no time, and half the people who had time and no money, because you need both to make an organization work. Our first event was at Jack Grimes's ranch. He's sitting right here. We had an event where the kids came out during the day. They got to see all the police vehicles as well as the fire engines and climb on them, and they had a great day. And then we had an event that night and we raised $40,000, so we had died and gone to heaven. And it worked very well for a number of years because we were able to balance not only the fundraising for the funds, but the activities that we did for the kids in the Sheriff's Family Day every year. Many of you have probably been to that event. It was very, very successful. The bylaws were changed after I left, and the bylaws were changed to make the sheriff a director of the council. We wrote it so the director would, or the sheriff would not be a director. The sheriff cannot be on as a board of director and an executive board member when you are the recipient of 501c3 funds. You have to have that separation. That's been tainted. The dues to get into it now is only wealthy people can afford it anymore. It's lost what it used to be, but it could come back in an afternoon.
Thank you. The next part of the debate will be the opportunity for each candidate to ask one question of another candidate. Asking the question will have 1 minute for rebuttal after that. We will begin this section of the debate with Lieutenant.
That'd be for Sheriff Anderson, and I'm asking it on behalf of a lot of people within the department, as well as probably a lot of you sitting out there. In the spirit of our department guiding principles, especially in the areas of integrity, courage, and fairness, and how they relate to the current Deputy Sheriff's Association candidate endorsement process controversy, why have you not taken a positive leadership role and requested that the total numbers be released and that a positive resolution to the questionable process be taken and resolved, rather than allow another organization affiliated with your department to be viewed with questionable behavior?
Well, typically I don't speak on behalf of the Deputy Sheriff's Association and their processes, but it's my understanding that the process that the Deputy Sheriff's Association chose to take was a fair process and followed a very logical sequence in the endorsement process. I was lucky enough to receive the endorsement as a result of that vote taking place. The Board of Directors has assured me that the process was very public, that it was explained at least 3 different times. It was put out on their website, and that the procedure that they had outlined was followed. There was an issue of the term plurality versus majority, but the board, and their intent was whoever received the most votes would receive the endorsement, and that's how they proceeded. Now, in terms of our guiding principles of integrity, fairness, and courage, I think the board has stood up to a lot of criticism regarding this process, and they're being unfairly criticized as a result of this process. Why is it that the other associations that have made endorsements have not been criticized by the other candidates, the Lompoc Police Department endorsing Chief Brown and the Santa Maria Police Department endorsing former Sheriff Thomas? The only endorsement that's being criticized is the one that has been made by the Deputy Sheriff's Association. I think it's unacceptable. I think that their endorsement process was fair and above board, and I think everybody knew what was going to happen when it happened.